So, are we doing this?
You mean the back and forth that ends with a snarky comment?
Yes.
I honestly don't feel like it today.
Good. Me neither.
We gotta get back to the past, to the 20th century. Digging through the bubble wrap into your memories. Back was the collector, he's protecting what we find. Relentless heavy metal guns keep us safe through time. Retro blasting.
This is not a toy.
Just the corners of your mind. Retro blasting. The stuff you love since you were 9. We're blasting into the past to see what thrills still last. Retro
Kenner Star Wars is, for many, the patient zero of great toys. The line is so legendary that many of the designs and quirks of the toys are just taken for granted. One of these eccentricities plagues pretty much the entire run and makes no sense at all. I've often heard the criticism that the lack of posability in Star Wars figures was a common gripe during playtime. Certainly G.I. Joes were more versatile in this respect, but it never bothered me that much. What did irk me was Kenner's devotion to rendering one hand of many of their figures completely useless.
I would assume that it was because of the type of machining that it takes to actually make a hand that's usable, because obviously it would probably include more plastic to make a cupped hand than an open hand, okay? Because you need to lengthen the length around the weapon. So I assume it's a tooling decision to save a penny.
All I can say is I think that Kenner was going for a playable action figure with a lot of playability, yes. But I think Kenner was going for a posable action figure as well. I think what they were going for is they were going for more of a specific pose on a lot of these figures.
Whether it was a style choice or a cost-cutting measure, Kenner rendered the left hands of their figures unable to hold accessories. Given that most characters only came with a single accessory anyway, it might not seem like a big deal, but it would have been cool to have figures dual-wield blasters once in a while. And some of the key characters were left crippled by the design, most notably the main hero.
Luke, Farm Boy, is completely useless. I mean, he doesn't really have much of anything, considering the fact that he's kind of, already holding the hilt of a white, nondescript lightsaber.
Luke Skywalker was given a permanent lightsaber up one of his arms for the saber activation gimmick, but his left hand wasn't designed to compensate and couldn't hold anything, which is frustrating given that Luke never uses a lightsaber in combat in Star Wars, and is best remembered firing that Stormtrooper blaster on the Death Star.
Luke does have a hand that is semi-usable, the one not holding the lightsaber, of course, because he could probably use a Princess Leia blaster, or further on down the line, he could probably hold a lightsaber, the second versions that they created, but that would seem pretty weird, him having a lightsaber in both hands. This isn't Attack of the Clones.
What? Darth Vader and Old Ben have the same lightsaber setup, but oddly, Kenobi's left hand is almost usable, even though unlike Luke, he only uses his lightsaber in the film, while Darth Vader is given a flat, open-palmed lefty. This type of hand was good for some things that were very much outside Vader's character, such as waving goodbye, and a reassuring pat on the shoulder. I guess a choking hand was out of the question. Many of the figures were given this open-palmed hand. So many, in fact, that Kenner Star Wars figures are second to none at setting up for drill team practice and throwing up the Nazi salute en masse. The people love you, mein Führer. Ja, wunderbar.
As you can see, Vader's kind of, doing the Heil Hitler thing there.
Both the original and Hoth Han Solo had these hands.
I'm going to go on a limb here. Maybe the reason for his useless hand is the fact that he does have an extra bend in his arm on both figures, and this one even has the workable holster. So there is a possibility that the extra sculpting or tooling it took to bend his arm took away from the fact of making him actually have a usable left hand.
The original Han had one arm tucked for hip shooting, but his straight arm was lame. Hoth Han was similar. In both cases, the most justifiable uses for these hands were working the controls of the Falcon and petting Chewbacca. The poor Tusken Raider was given 2 open palms and stuck in that one pose.
The Tusken Raider, you know, he's got the gaffy stick, and he's supposed to be holding it up above his head or kind of here.
The fact that he not only has 2 essentially open hands, but they're turned inside. So making him only able to carry a gaffy stick, which even that's unsuccessful sometimes. He virtually has 2 useless hands.
In rare instances, likely by sheer chance, the useless hand wasn't so useless. Yoda's right hand is in a force pose, so he can lift Luke's X-Wing out of the bog. Boba Fett's passed as his Superman flight hand. Hammerhead's harken back to his days as a cantina DJ. At least the open palm allowed for some interpretation. It was the figures with their hands at their sides with only a slightly parted thumb that were the worst. The number one victim of this design was, once again, Luke Skywalker.
Luke X-Wing, he's got another lobster claw.
Bespin Luke Skywalker was one of the few Star Wars figures to come with 2 weapons, his blaster and his lightsaber. But Kenner didn't design his hand so he could hold both securely. The blaster can only go in the right hand. You can precariously position the lightsaber in the left hand, but it didn't stay there for play purposes.
That's about the limit of weapons he can actually use. So it doesn't look like it was a very practical design.
And if you leave the blaster in the right hand too long, it stretches the fingers to the point that the lightsaber won't stay in there at all. Kenner corrected the left hand with Jedi Luke Skywalker, and carried it over to Endor Luke Skywalker, as both were given 2 functional hands. Biker Scout also had 2 working hands, so he could operate the speeder bike. Then you had characters where both hands were so badly designed it didn't even matter. Take 9 Numb and TIE Fighter pilot. The right hand is barely more usable than the left. There was one figure in the Kenner line that had 2 beefy usable hands, and that was the Rebel Commando. Unfortunately, they decided to give him a gun he couldn't hold because the handle was too big. The worst hands in the line were on the droids, and no, I don't mean droids like 8D8 and 21B, where the hands were accurate to the film robots. No, I'm talking about C-3PO and Death Star droid, where the hands are supposed to be human-like, but are frozen together in this underhanded position that's only useful at cupping Weequay's
Remco in 79 produced a Monsters line who did not have any articulation or ability to hold something. Care Bears in 83 had only 1 usable hand. And yes, 84 produces Masters of the Universe, and they too only have 1 usable hand. This was something that clearly was a design choice that was shared by Mattel, Remco, and other companies of the time of the early 80s.
I mean, out of the 21 that we've got here, Hammerhead has a useless hand, Greedo has a useless hand, C-3PO, Chewbacca, Princess Leia. Most of them have useless hands, so I guess that's just the way it is. And, you know, to be honest with you, when I was a kid, I didn't really consider it, and it was something I just played with, because as long as they've got a weapon in one hand, either left or right, it didn't make any difference to me.
I think the true game changer came with the emergence of G.I. Joe, who constantly produced figures that can use both hands. And of course, Transformers also did the same on most of their line.
When you have 2 hands that are the exact same thing or the exact same way, I just don't think that it makes it interesting. I think if you've got one hand that's holding a blaster and another hand that is not able to hold a blaster but is still interesting enough to strike an interesting pose and make the figure look interesting, I don't think that it's a problem.
When you consider that other lines like G.I. Joe, Buck Rogers, and even Kenner's own Indiana Jones generally had action figures with 2 usable hands, it's strange to see how Kenner tied one hand behind the back of 95% of its Star Wars lineup.
At least there was some kind of functionality to them. You know, well, maybe not a whole lot of functionality.